I never even really understand what a nobelium was, and frankly, it always felt like something that you caught from bad water.
I thought it was if you won the prize, you are now a threat actor, but only
Mm,
in physics. Only in
only in
physics.
physics. Is the Nobelium Prize for APT given out in Stockholm or Crimea?
Ooh, I want to say Leningrad. That would be
Mm, there we
you get a
go.
time
Going.
machine, and then you win the award.
I like it. Welcome to Coffee Talk with Serge, where we discuss esoteric subjects such as mineral rights and naming for APT actors. My name is Ryan Kovar. This is Mick Baccio, Audra Streetman. We're going to be with you for, I used to say 30 minutes, but I guess nowadays we pretty much always go to about 45. So let's just call it about
Chatty
45
Cathy's. That's what we
minutes.
do.
Yeah. Should be full of snark and fun. We're going to talk about some Pegasus, which is always a fun one, some LockBit ransomware, because it's a day in the week of the year that we live in. Oldmar, fact or fiction, going to find out from Audra. Then I'm not going to screw up. We're going to do a 60-second charity countdown where we're going to talk about AI and
Pussy.
threat intelligence and finish off with some discussion about Microsoft threat actor taxonomy. Because what else makes a phenomenal show than taxonomical discussions and debates? Huh?
Taxonomical. Say that 3
Taxonomical.
times fast.
That's the after hours edition. So
Is
with
that the right
that,
word? Is that really a
um,
word?
I
let's
don't
roll
know.
with it. Let's go into the news, Audra. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. All right. If Ryan says taxonomical is a word, then we'll go with that. So for news stories today, Citizen Lab actually just released a report today. This is about NSO Group continually deploying spyware, or customers rather of NSO Group, just deploying spyware and zero-click exploit chains. At least 3 of them for iOS. They observed civil society targets around the world that had spyware on their phones. And that includes human rights defenders in Mexico. And so they're calling these zero clicks Pony Your Home and Find My Pwn. And the first one they said was used against iOS 15 and 16. They both have 2 stages. The first targets HomeKit and then iMessage for Pony Your Home. Find My Pwn was deployed against iOS 15, targets the Find My feature in iMessage. They also found traces of NSO Group's first zero-click exploit that they call latent image. And Citizen Lab, they shared these findings with Apple all the way back in January, and that actually led to security updates in iOS 16.3.1. And one of the interesting things that I read in this report was that researchers found that targets who had lockdown mode enabled for iOS 16 actually received real-time warnings for the Pony Your Home zero-click anytime that was attempted, and they didn't find any evidence that it actually succeeded with that exploit. So.
Well, luckily we can't buy that software in America anymore, right? So that's just
That's good.
that's done.
Yes, Ryan, as the Android user, tell us how is
It's feeling good. Am I?
Did I?
right?
Oh my gosh, Pony Your Home. I was reading that wrong. Pwn Your Home.
I don't
Yes.
know.
There's a
I like
Y, but
the
it's for your. I
I
can read, I
What's
promise.
that
Just
one
not
bird?
today.
What's that one bird, Audra? It's
Pwn
I
Your
just
Home.
thought you were
Oh
making
my
a really
gosh.
good genuine reference,
I am not
like
going to live that down.
ride my
Pwn Your
pony.
Home.
no.
At first, I thought it was a typo, but I was like, nope, just
Nope, just
making
keep
my own
going.
words here.
So solid.
Um,
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Pegasus. This is something that Mick and I, in our secret squirrel days, we've been thinking and talking about Pegasus for what, 10 years? NSO Group,
Publicly
10 years?
sure.
Yeah, publicly, sure. Yeah, I mean, everything I talk about publicly is dated to 2012, I think, when I joined Splunk. So, yeah.
So my big takeaway from this was, I would first, well, patch your phone, blah 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 blah. Keep it always updated when something comes out because there's always something like this as a result of it. It's a credit to the team over at Apple on the back end of it. Lockdown mode, I think a lot of people I know that use iPhones and have religiously for years. Like, what's lockdown mode? This is new.
Yeah.
So if you're a user, enable it if you're in that threat profile, and I think that's a fantastic kind of, hey, this is going to happen. Things like blocking FaceTime calls, not neutering links, but like neutering the preview for it, so it kind of prevents that one click and phoning home everything else. I think credit to Apple, it's a fantastic job to kind of prevent at least this version of Pegasus.
Yeah, the fact that lockdown mode is, because with 0-click, I mean, what else can you do, right? I mean, there's nothing, you don't even have to click the link, it's 0-click. So the thing I wonder about, the signs of spyware on a phone, right? Like, is it your battery usage goes down significantly? I mean, how else would you know if you're targeted without forensics to like what
maybe
Citizen
like
Lab
15 years ago, sure, right? Oh, your battery is going to get really hot. Oh, it's going to drain faster. It's going to be warm. That
15 years ago on a BlackBerry?
Sure, right? On the cool Blackberries.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of that applies anymore. There's what's that resource by TrailBits? I think it's iVerify is a fantastic.
I love that movie too. Will Smith.
It's really good. So it says, slap this point home. I think what you want to do is just, kind of go through your phone, make sure there's privacy settings to whatever you're comfortable with, and just always keep those applications updated and the operating system updated. I've found that even with auto update set, sometimes you have to go back in and manually update a lot of the applications.
Yeah.
I think there's also value in looking if you do have high, I haven't looked enough at this vulnerability to 100% understand, but, there's value in having different crates to put your eggs. So things like Signal, things like, areas that there's a kind of an encrypted volume within your phone, even if it's on. Like,
yo, dog, I heard you like encryption. I think that's what you're.
Well, and what's interesting here is, we found out last year, I think 2022, the FBI. Once again, this is neither here nor there. There's no victim blaming, but the FBI for years, Director Wray has railed against the encryption on the hard drive or on phones as being a significant blocker to the ability to, find terrorists, right?
And then anyway, right. That's why we need it. We need an encryption into the encryption.
Dog. I need some encryption on the encryption. But like now I'm remembering that like the FBI almost bought NSO Group Pegasus software for these purposes in 2022, right? So it's,
the same way we operate a business now.
Did we just make the same exasperated sigh and Audra just looked at us with disgust? I think that was a...
That's not what you are assigning emotions that I did not display.
So like this, if I want to buy something, it comes from this bucket of money. If I want training, it comes from this bucket of money, right? So I think your encryption should if I want to have this conversation, it's on Signal. If I want to talk about this, it's via WhatsApp, whatever that method is. It's just always that second layer of encryption you should, by default, start adding in.
Okay, so I just Googled, and apparently Amnesty International released this mobile verification toolkit. I just shared it in the LinkedIn chat. For some reason, I can't access the chat from our streaming platform, but there's a GitHub, and you can use this with Android and iOS to check for Pegasus on your phone if you suspect that you might have it. So there you go.
And what is it? iVerify is the other one, which is a fantastic resource.
And I guess it scans data transfer logs
worth looking. I mean,
anyway.
If I was in a network defense role, I think for certainly high value targets, these are places I would be looking at. I mean, I was talking the other day to a friend who has to send in spear phishing emails, and they have to like download and right click and like turn it into a .msg and then send the MSG as a attachment to their internal SOC. And for me, that's crazy because I do 80% of my email these days are on my phone. And if I don't have the option to just forward or deal with it, like that's just not something. So you look at how much business is being done by senior level executives or et cetera on their phones. Like these are the modern computing platforms that people are using. So I hope that folks are taking this seriously, whether or not they're high value targets from a group buying NSO or not. You're not sure who they're selling the software to. But I will say, I believe the NSO got a new CEO this year, so hopefully this is really helping his revenue stream. It's
fantastic news. Capitalism works, folks.
There we go. What else do we have, Ms. Audra?
So ransomware.
Any more genuine songs?
No, but we do have LockBit. LockBit apparently is creating encryptors for Mac devices. So the researcher malware hunter team found the encryptors on a zip archive on VirusTotal. And so LockBit is probably the first ransomware group I know of that has designed encryptors to target Mac. Typically, it's been, Windows, Linux, VMware, ESXi servers. And so these newly discovered encryptors, they're designed to target Mac OS and a number of new targets. And so I think it was Florian Roth actually found an Apple M1 encryptor that was on VirusTotal that dates back to December 2022. But there are researchers who have looked into these encryptors, and according to Bleeping Computer, they say that they were likely used just for testing and not actually to deploy. But that could change since this shows that they're working on it. So something to monitor because, ransomware attacks have largely been, Windows and servers, but not so much Mac OS up until maybe now.
Yeah, and I believe, if I remember correctly, though, this is still, it's not able to run. It looks like they're going down the development path of, but you can't actually run this on a MacBook yet, if I remember correctly.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing that they're bypassing viruses and going straight to ransomware because Macs don't get viruses, and them getting ransomware just skips a step in the cyber evolution. So I think it's really, really interesting to see from a threat actor perspective. So I'm interested to see how that plays out.
One thing I find fascinating, like the two news stories Audra kind of pulled out that we talked about today, right? Like they're both about they're about Apple iOS, which traditionally has not been, the area that we've spent a lot of time looking at. But
because Apple historically has been an incredibly secure end-to-end.
Well, and I think they still are. I think this is just evidence that, once again, not victim blaming. It's that actors are looking at other places, and especially I think post-pandemic, a lot of people have moved to, MacBooks and Apple devices on their home computing. And then obviously iPhone, at least in the US, does dominate, and a lot of Western countries, it's the number one platform, right? So we're seeing evolution of, these are being used more. I think Apple has for many years done it right of owning the end-to-end, snout to tail of their hardware to software. Like there's some major issues there, but it does allow them to make an incredibly secure, robust platform for computing. But
I agree. I think it also adds to the context of that executive phone is an iPhone, right? Whereas, like you mentioned earlier, 15 years ago, a throwback to that, the BlackBerry was the executive phone, right? And now, if I'm targeting a C-level executive, I'm going to write something for iOS because they're going to be on their phone, and it's likely going to be an iPhone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I am fascinated about. The LockBit group. Obviously we have a little bit of affection for them since they recognize Shannon Davis's great work on ransomware in their forum.
Not Shannon, but like the group in general. They're criminals, whatever. Like die in a fire. I
guess in this case we are victim blaming. We're
scumbags, right?
Yeah.
It's just how are they still a group is just the thing, right? It's almost like a nation state level threat actor.
Oh, absolutely.
Well,
okay, that's a different show, but
well, it's not. I wouldn't say nation state. I would just say it's a corporation. They're so well organized, so well oiled, right? They have all of these processes that they've established, and they're kind of like on the front end of ransomware trends, right? Like setting that like bug bounties.
Nothing like a North Korean government office would do. It's not similar at all. It's just, I think that the brazenness in which they attack, what they're doing, the development is incredible for a criminal group.
Well, they're at bare minimum. I think we can safely assume they're nation state sheltered,
adjacent.
Yeah. And they, to your point and Audra's point, like if you feel comfortable enough to create this level of sophistication, like you're able to do some pretty incredible things, right? If you're not scurrying from one hidey hole to another, but if you're able to set up offices and spend time, like somebody sat down and said, guys, we're hitting our, we need to expand into greenfield. Like, let's really think about going into the Mac.
Like they brought in a management consulting group, and they came and go, hey guys, here's the big sky picture.
What's the evil version of the big five? Is there an axis of evil for big five?
It's accentus.
Yeah. Bernstein Old, Deloitte. What's the I want to know who comes in with that PowerPoint. And like for 36 more hours of consulting, we can get you 100% increase in penetration in the Mac OS X market. It's gonna be great.
I mean, for an inside sales rep, it's got to be pretty tempting.
Really crush your commission, get a free Lambo for every 100th MacBook popped.
Territory? There is no territory. The internet.
It's the internet.
The world.
Yep, will be interesting to see what LockBit does next. So our next story is actually about the February 2021 cyber attack targeting a water treatment plant in Oldsmar, Florida. Well, it turns out that may not have been a cyber attack after all. So in a statement to CyberScoop, the FBI said that it was not able to confirm that a cyber intrusion happened from their investigation of that incident. And the former city manager actually recently reportedly said at a meeting, like a virtual meeting, that the FBI concluded there was no evidence of any access from the outside, that it was likely the same employee that was purported to be a hero for catching it was actually, quote, banging on his keyboard. So, for background, this was an employee at this water treatment plant who reportedly saw someone log into the system, the remote desktop system, I think. And then 5 hours later, they noticed that the chemical of sodium hydroxide had been raised to dangerous levels from like 100 parts per million to 11,000 parts per million, which is obviously not good. So they had to immediately respond and get that back down to a healthy level. So, it could easily have been a human error. And I think that's an interesting point to make when you immediately jump to, is this a cyber attack? Is this a mistake? How do you differentiate? And then it becomes a major news story that people continually cite. I don't know.
I mean, I couldn't hear you over Southwest Airlines today.
Really?
Has there been an update on that?
Yeah,
I have not.
Here. It's over, but no, there's no root cause or anything like that. But I'm sure we'll hear something about it in the coming weeks. The Oldsmar story is amazing to me because this was February of 2021, and it is April of 2023. So can you imagine this time gap of this IT administrator just waiting for this story to come out about, oh man, they're gonna find out it was really me, just bang, bang, bang.
One day. Aww.
2 years have gone by, just waiting with this wait.
Yeah. But it's not to downplay the risk that does exist for operational technology and critical infrastructure, because it's there. It's just, I guess this was one of the first examples of possibly, targeting to poison a community, right? With dangerous water contamination. So I don't know.
I think
so. You're saying that banging on your keyboard is a viable solution, not just printers.
You make a mistake, you're like, cyber attack, it wasn't me.
It wasn't me, it was the criminals. I didn't hack the machine. See, you're just full of good songs today, Audra. I like this story because, I saw the other day there was a report that somebody did a survey and found that Americans now fear cyber attack more than nuclear attack. That came out earlier, on the 7th, I think. And it is the breathless reporting because people care much, like Colonial Pipeline, right? That opened up, I use my father-in-law, very smart man, civil engineer, retired. He doesn't really care that much about cyber, but one day when he was can the Chinese listen to me through my TV? And I was like, well, I mean, smart TV.
What kind of TV?
Yeah, I'm I don't think that's
the question.
Shared Grippo is okay with this. I'm I don't think it's in their threat model.
Did you download WeChat to your
what are you
TV?
What are you doing there, buddy? What civil engineer projects are you working on? But yeah, technically. I think Colonial Pipeline is an example where people were awakened to the idea that these cyber bullets can have real world impact. And certainly, I believe there's an aspect of media where this is exciting stuff and it can fill headlines for a couple weeks or apparently years, right? We're talking about this now.
And what about incident response and then, investigating? Because with incident response, say it's at the very beginning and you're notified something's not right. And then how do you determine?
Oh, this is, we talked about this a couple months ago, right? Audra, we talked about this with some of the bills that were being pushed through or looked at being pushed through around mandatory reporting requirements. Mm-hmm. And when do you start the clock? I remember in a former life, we were never allowed to call something an incident unless the CISO said it was an incident because he had regulatory requirements if it was an incident. So if it was an event, if it was an action, if it was an attack, that was fine. But as soon as the word incident was put into an email, then that meant it was a thing that had a counting clock, right? And I think there is a lot of this, to your point of like, what is defining X in these areas? Like, and when you have these very complicated interwoven machines, like when do you know it was somebody, years ago, I assume hopefully this has changed, but I mean, you could go on Shodan, put in some various strings that would pop up for ICS or OT equipment. And within a matter of 20 or 30 minutes, you could stumble your way into like an open portal for a wastewater plant in Albania. Nothing wrong with Albania. It's just an example that I had. Like that was pretty easy because people weren't securing them. They were using default username and passwords, or they were just open to the internet because if I just have it in an IP address, no one can find it. These aren't going away. And I do find it fascinating. The Oldsmar though, like hit the news, everyone talked about it, went away. And now it's like, oh, sorry, just flipped the wrong bit there.
Yeah. So interesting story for sure. I think that's all we have for news, but we do have some upcoming events that we want to get to.
We see some fun people in the chat. Hi to Ganga, Mary Vaughn, Malaz, Jessica, Kaiser, Khalid, Mark, all sorts of folks. We got people all the way from Sheffield to Tehran, which is pretty fascinating in many ways. So thanks everyone for joining. If you do have questions, feel free to bring them up. And what are these upcoming events, Audra? Or in progress, I think.
Yeah, so I guess tomorrow, is it? Cyber UK starts in Belfast.
Yeah.
Then also RSA is next week, which is crazy. I'm kind of in denial that that's next week because I have not prepared in any way for
Well, it's
packing.
not like you're giving the biggest talk of your life.
Well, okay, I've prepared a little bit, but yeah, so that's happening next week. And we have a few talks lined up. I'm speaking with Lillian Tang over at Capital One about recruiting and hiring career changers and how that can be helpful with closing, the skills gap in cybersecurity. David Bianco did an awesome research project looking at 5 billion certificates to evaluate certificate authorities and how trustworthy they are.
I mean, I did a great job.
Well, Ryan is going to take all the credit because he'll be delivering that talk at RSA. And then Ryan Fetterman, of course, is talking about his attack trending analysis to see what type of attack techniques are most commonly cited according to different reports from the public sector to, CISA and other reports. Red Canary, I think, was one of them. So very interesting stuff. I'm excited to see some of those talks and some of the other talks. And of course, we'll have a recap. I think we have a show actually, right, Mick, on next Tuesday. So that'll be coming up.
Yes. There is a show next Tuesday. It's a 1-1 interview. John DiMaggio and Jags are going to come hang out before our lunch at RSA. So if you're around RSA, you can't come to the show, but you can come to lunch.
There you go.
Awesome.
And then we also have a tiki bar, right?
Oh, right. We should, put all that together. We have a exciting reveal for RSA. Are we talking about, are we allowed to say, or is it top secret?
Yeah, it's out there. Go for it.
Okay. Well, Mick has this project he's been working on for a long time, a book, an actual published book that we're releasing called Bluenomicon with a number of essays from various leaders in cybersecurity about leadership, about their stories, war stories, so to speak. So it's a really interesting book. We're excited to release it. And so, that's going to come out next week, which is really exciting.
And to celebrate, we're having a book launch party, and we might be able to show this in a couple minutes, but we have a Splunk Luau, a tiki bar. Yep, somebody just posted in the chat there, which is great. Feel free to register. I'm going to be leading a panel here with Nicole Beckwith from Kroger, Jamie Williams from MITRE ATT&CK, and the grand dame of cyber, I think, in the world, Wendy Nather, right? One of the most famous CISOs in the industry. We're super pumped. It's been just phenomenal process. Mick did a great job on this. I wrote the whole book, all 30 essays, although I ghost wrote them for other people. It's going to be phenomenal.
Very benevolent of you. Yeah, it's a fantastic event. I'm looking forward to it. So if you're at RSA all next week, pay attention to Splunk's social media, our social media. We let you know where we're going to be, and stop by and come get a book. We have several thousand to give away.
And as a reminder now, every Tuesday we have Coffee Talk with Sturge. So like Audra said, next week we'll be back with some actually John and Jags are both authors in the book. So you'll hear their thoughts and kind of go through, which will be pretty exciting, like we've already talked about. Post the name of the book, Mick? Want to post the name?
Yeah, it's Blue Nomicon. Let me see if I can find it. There.
I posted the link to the Luau event in the chat for LinkedIn. I don't know if we have another link, but
it's a very cool looking book, but we're not going to show it because we haven't actually released. We haven't actually got our hands on the physical copy yet. I think we have 7,000.
I think we're allowed to either. That's I think that's the line where our adults were like, "Hey, no."
Yep. But I will have the physical copy at RSA. We'll have the physical copies at .conf, and then for Black Hat, we'll be releasing a digital version as well.
It's blue.
Yep, but it's blue. We fought really hard for the blue part. Shockingly hard for the blue part. So pretty excited about that. Yeah, and that's what we got coming up right now. And let's see. I'm going to do this right this time.
Yep, charity challenge.
Let's go into a charity challenge. Yeah.
And now, Splunk Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck!
All right, so the challenge this week is about artificial intelligence and cyber threat intelligence. And this is following an announcement from Recorded Future that they are rolling out generative AI to kind of help synthesize data and help with their threat intelligence platform. And so my question to both of you today is just your thoughts on what role AI can play in cyber threat intelligence and any concerns you might have about using that in that process. So who wants to go first?
Mick, I believe you're the undefeated champion pretty much this year.
I think I'll keep my streak going by having you go first again.
So some disclosure here. Everyone should know Recorded Future we're very good friends with. I believe they're official Splunk partner, so there's no right or wrong here regarding their announcement, although Mick and I may have different thoughts on where AI in threat intelligence goes through. We didn't actually pick a charity this round, Mick, so I think actually there's a little bit of a lag here. We've never done this before. But if someone in the audience wants to put forward a charity, we'll pick one of the ones that's put out by the people watching. And if not, then we'll donate to ACLU because that's something important to all of us. And Mick especially, who probably needs their help more than the rest of us.
Wait, I have a 501. Let me put my 501.
Not jeans. We're not talking about blue jeans. Yeah, I know. That was pretty clever. I'm really...
Stop delaying.
I'm thinking.
Who's going first?
All right. This is mostly because I did not have a chance to write this, but I have been living and breathing generative AI for the last 4 weeks. So we will see how this goes. Mick, I'm going to lose, but I'm going to love losing to you once again. Drew, let's go through this. Okay, so the general concept here is that artificial intelligence, generative AI, which I want to be very clear, I put in a different category than AI pre-generative AI. Right? You look at RSA show floor, you see AI everywhere for the last 10 years. We're not talking about that. We're talking about augmentation. So for me, generative AI, which also could be, in my opinion, pretty much synonymous with iterative AI, allows you to ask questions and then have text come back in a fun, easy to read way. ChatGPT does this extremely well. For example, I went on a ChatGPT the other day and tried to have a quick, succinct explanation of what APT41 was so I could give that to a friend. I said, describe APT41, explain like I'm five bullet points, 20 words. It worked phenomenally. Here's the problem with AI or generative AI today. It lies to you by omission. You don't know exactly what you're going to get. So until you have full fidelity and faith in the answers that come back from generative AI, you're going to have issues with any intelligence project created from it. So you have to make sure you have a subject matter expert who's looking at the data as an augmentation.
Okay. Mick, are you ready?
All right.
I think I'm ready. All right, Drew, cue it up. So, bored, so I was reading Dickens, so, the reference kind of stuck with me. It's like a tale of two cities, this AI tale from Recorded Future. Right, on one hand, the positive outcomes, there's going to be faster response times. Generative AI is going to help you write reports. It's going to be thorough. Grammarly is kind of like the same thing that we're doing now. So I think the report writing going to get better, response times are going to get faster. On the other hand, the negative outcomes, the worst of times, the AI is going to be super biased, but it's going to be confident in that bias. So you're not really going to be able to tell if it's a false positive or not. The temporal nature of threat actor infrastructure, I think, is going to be a problem for any model that gets thrown at it. And also, it still goes back to the issue of telemetry. Your model is going to be based, biased based on the data you throw at it, and your telemetry is going to be biased. So anything you generate from that is going to be biased as well. So take that into account. It's a double-edged sword like anything else with AI.
All right, Mick is the winner, and I'll say why. You both had a great response.
Wasn't even a thought there. You didn't even try to let me down easy. She was done. Fucking done.
Well, first of all, bias, obviously, that's a concern and an accuracy, right? But you also mentioned the temporal nature of threat actors, right? Like changing infrastructure, new, clustering activity groups coming up. And that's something that AI, I think, might struggle with, because AI exceeds the best with, set rules and set data sets, right? And if this is something new and something evolving, I think that would be more difficult to track effectively.
I think you're being mean to AI. There's something about confidently incorrect people of bias. Like, I don't know that this resonates with me. And
but I guess it depends on how you're using AI for the job, right? Like if you're relying on it completely, or are you using it as a tool to help facilitate your process?
I'm just saying, Drew, most incredible producer, disagrees with you, Audra. And I think you'll find that in the AI revolution, Drew and I will come out on top.
We'll be on the other side of the robots. Oh, you understand. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Maybe you should both donate. I don't know. Mick is not the winner.
That's okay, what we don't have, though, is the donation location. So if you're watching, there's a little bit of a lag. Feel free to throw up a charity that you care about, and we'll pick one as we kind of keep going through, because I think we're ready for a deep dive.
And now we talk about things that just happen to be on our minds with who's ever here, because we made this up before I knew who'd accept my meeting invite.
Okay, this is ties into threat intelligence a little bit, or a lot of it. So Microsoft announced a whole new taxonomy for identifying and labeling different threat actor groups. And so this one, it's interesting. They're calling Russia Blizzard as part of the name, China Typhoon, Iran Sandstorm, North Korea Sleet, Turkey Dust, Vietnam Cyclone, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes on, but you get the theme, right? We're talking about different weather patterns.
I'm confused how Microsoft is going to make sexy cartoons of sleet. I mean, is this Captain Planet for threat actors?
Well, so, okay, my question here is, do you currently struggle with remembering threat actor names, especially, different organizations have their own names, and it's hard to even keep like a Rosetta, for instance, because someone identifies this group as this doesn't mean it's the exact same as, there's like overlap, but it's not exactly the same group, and that gets really complicated. And then you add in a new naming convention. Do you think this will complicate things or make it simpler?
Well, I think if I'm very, and full disclosure, Mick and I know the Mystic team very well. Phenomenally, some of the best cybersecurity people in the world, bar none. The chart, the table of using the elemental table was intended to break down bias, I believe. Actually, I think Sergio is one who probably created it. And the concept there is you're not influenced or biased by the names because they are without context, right? The concern was always, when you hear Sparkling Kitten, there was a belief.
Why I gotta be a panda?
Yeah, like why not a panda? Why not a bear? Right? Like these are national country, things that have a bias inferred. So by breaking it down to these, other things that you couldn't have a bias because like barium, I do not associate with whatever country that's associated with. It's just barium. So it's interesting moving to this. I do wonder how much of it is a marketing aspect, which there's nothing wrong with, but it is easier to understand. Like if I know that Blizzard is Russia, if I see, Frozen Blizzard, then I know that it's a Russian group. But right. I have to remember very specifically that, Nobelium or barium or Byzantinium, whatever it is all something else. So
once upon a time, I had a real job, this is not really a new naming convention or system, right? It's everything's under one blanket umbrella, and there's a descriptor on top of it. I think kudos to them. To your point, I don't know how much is marketing driven, but also it makes sense because of how big the field has gotten. The amount of threat actors that we're keeping track of now, I mean, we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, has grown exponentially. So they need a more organizational way to keep that taxonomy going because of how many subgroups there are. As far as rote memorization, and Brian, keep me honest here, when the Snowden leaks happened, well, I'm going all the way back. When the Manning leaks happened, all of the intrusion set cover terms were changed. Right. So you had to memorize entirely new intrusion set names, and you weren't allowed to crosswalk in reports. And then after the Snowden leaks, same thing again, where they were all changed because OPSEC, right? So you had to memorize all of that again. So this, to me, it's not nothing new. It comes with being in that role of threat intelligence. And also speaks to that's why it was changed in the government side for the most part because of that security. At what point does it make sense for private sector elements to do that as well?
Yeah, and I think so. Obviously, previous namings were chemicals, right? That was what nobelium and hafnium, etc.
Elements, yeah.
Right, not chemicals, elements. Clearly, I'm not a science expert.
Minerals, Marie.
Minerals. Whatever. On the earth, I don't know. So anyway, and I think there was also a volcano naming convention for a subset of threat actors for Microsoft. And I thought about this before. I was like, well, aren't there only so many, right, elements or so many volcanoes on the planet? What happens when you run out? Because they're continually new groups.
Have you not seen a Marvel movie? You just make them up. You just make up elements, be like, oh yeah, we found this here. It's
the naming convention of having two names, right, where you have the location identifier and then something to go along with it that's kind of random, like Ruby or Aqua or whatever it is. I think that makes a lot of sense because you have so many more combinations that you can do.
Well, it's that essentially that CrowdStrike model.
Yeah.
Right. Which is not unique to CrowdStrike, but it goes back to it's easier to keep everything under a blanket.
Which is a good point, right? Like the elements, that was always going to be finite because there is a finite number of elements, right?
You see how all of us are dodging exactly how many? We're like
110.
I don't know. I thought they were chemicals, so I'm not going to weigh in on that.
Next week on our science episode.
But Mandiant / Google went to N+1, right? That was the general concept there. It's just APT 42, 45, 60, they'll go into infinity, right? CrowdStrike obviously went towards more of a, national identity and subgroup. I think Kaspersky did similar. Now they've moved to this. From a mental point of view, I find it easier now that I just see, I don't actually care. I mean, that's the dirty secret, right? I care if it's Russia. I care if it's China, I guess. But I don't usually care which wing of the MSS it was, just because there was a
point in time that I did because I was in the role,
right?
And
how many people are really in that role
scale, right? And at a C level, what bucket does it fall under? The granularity is for the analysts below me and to tailor the response they're telling me.
See, I'll disagree with you on that one. That's where I found the people who were most interested. It was tell me who hurt me. I want to know specifically who hurt me. Show me on the map.
Yeah.
I got asked, but I always answered that I can tell you, but you're probably not going to understand or care. Here's the big bucket.
Yeah.
Audra, you just went through the CTI course at SANS. What are your thoughts on the value of attribution, or what's the modern scholarship?
Well,
Audra?
Something I was just thinking about, because on Microsoft's blog or press release that they put out about this, it has the chart of all the previous names, new names,
Rosetta
origin.
Stone of Rosetta Stone.
But then it has the other names, and I think that's where it gets really interesting. Is when people say, APT 29, also known as Cozy Bear, also known as Nobelium, etc. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not 100% true, and it can get confusing, and people can be incorrect. And there's even been examples of reports coming out where, one organization will say this actor also known as, but then someone might come out from another organization and say, actually, that's not entirely correct because we had this internal research that we haven't released yet that shows that who you're calling this is actually this. And that's actually happened before. And I think that's something to keep in mind when you are using attribution in a report or just in conversation, is that it may not exactly overlap with similar groups. And it's important to keep that in mind.
Why does that confusion of threat actors occur, Audra?
Well, just because of, the Rosetta, for instance, if people take it just at face value that this group is exactly this group, but if different organizations are tracking it, they might have different visibility over, right? Like Microsoft has great visibility over so many endpoints, right? Whereas another organization might only have a sliver of that they can see, and that could affect how they label and how they group. And that's where it gets confusing, is that you just can't say this organization's clustering is the same as this organization's clustering.
I find it fascinating too, depending on the biases of the analysts. For example, we'll use Dragos as a great example. They focus on OT. They're going to have a bias towards adversaries that focus on that, and they're going to probably have a greater granularity because they have more visibility and knowledge than per se an organization that doesn't focus on OT but stumbles on it. Drew, if you want to show the screen there for those kind of talking about what Audra went through. This is a good example of just that Rosetta Stone. You have the Microsoft name, you have the previous names of the elements, you have the new name, Aqua Blizzard, which, by the way, David Bianco wins yet again. Blizzard, Dairy Queen is coming for my data, APT, BTU, very brutal. But you kind of go through origin of threat, where they're coming from, and the other names that they're probably best known for, which I think is always fascinating, right? Like, I never remember barium that well, but I remember APT41 extremely well. I'm never going to remember Canvas Cyclone, but I do remember Ocean Lotus. I think a lot of times it's who, the rule of thumb, right, in cyber is if you find it, you get to name it. That's why you have some ridiculous malware, ridiculous
sticky fingers.
Yep.
Some of the best, though.
Anthony Murphy's. These are things that exist. Crouching Yeti, like, that's a great one too. I love that name. But Ghost Blizzard, now we have to remember Ghost Blizzard, Bromium, Energetic Bear, and Crouching Yeti. When will CISA save us? Save us, Jen. Save us, Jen. That's what we need.
Yeah. When can we just figure out attribution, right? It's not simple.
Or does it matter? Which kind of goes back to the other...
right. Like,
quiet you. It matters.
It goes back to if I can't send a missile, if I can't, I'm arguing against myself here because I actually really valued threat intelligence by actors when I had a day job because it was useful for me to be able to pivot to find new intrusions. But I go back to the granularity sometimes isn't as useful. And if I can't really quantitatively prove it, then you're always just kind of hoping for the best as it is.
I think it goes back to the discussion that we have a lot where it's you are a consumer or a producer, and there are very few producers out there. So if you're a consumer, that's fine. Just live in that world. And I think attribution for you becomes less of an issue. But at the big kids table, I guess, that level of telemetry is unmatched by very few, and given that visibility, I think your aperture becomes very specific and you have that wisdom. Whereas if you're a consumer, it's just, hey, this is what I need to know for my specific lens.
Yeah.
We're
And
hitting
I guess
45 minutes, right? So
yeah, I'll stop. I could go on and on about this, but
it's I mean, this is one of our, I think we've talked about attribution 5 or 6 times in the last year. And Sergio and I had a long talk about this. Maybe someone can put that in the chat, but Sergio and I discussed attribution and creating threat groups and his experience doing it when he was at Microsoft and Dragos and other places. So if you're interested...
that's fantastic. Yeah, if you catch us next week at RSA, if you're out there in San Francisco, you find one of the 3 of us, we'll talk attribution, just anywhere on the spot, right? In the halls, we'll just talk attribution.
And on top of that, you're going to be talking with Jags probably, who will be walking around, and Jags's views on attribution are extremely different than ours because of his background. So,
I mean, he's a researcher. It's super. That's the jam, right?
Jags'sJam.com. So with that, catch us next week where Mick will be interviewing a couple folks, hopefully. The three of us will all be at RSA. I will be presenting David Bianco's incredible work on his behalf. I'll hopefully do it justice. Dr. Fetterman will be presenting. Audra will be presenting. And then we'll be back every Tuesday. So until then, thank you very much.
Signing books all next
yeah,
week.
we're
Find
signing
us
books.
then.
7,000
All
of
week.
them. All real. All authentic signatures, I swear. Well,
Casey said so I have to believe her.
There we go. With that, Drew, take us away. I think we're done for the day.
Surge.